Working with lights in After Effects is very much like working with lights in any other 3D program. They actually allow you for much of the same settings that you have within those environments, and they try to mimic what you see in real world scenarios. So how do we create lights? Well, in this composition that I have set up here, I want to go ahead and bring in a camera first and foremost. So let me go ahead and create a new camera, and I'm going to keep it at 35 mil. So I'm going to keep that as the setting. And I'm going to make it a 2-node camera in this case because I want my camera to be focused somewhere in the composition. Now let me click OK on that for now. And let's go ahead and open up the settings for these pre-compositions that we have in this setup, in this composition. Let me press the P key on the keyboard, and you'll notice that they all have different values on the Z-axis. Notice that they all have been converted to 3D layers. So they all have different values on their Z-axis. Same applies for these ones over here. They're at 0 value. So now let's go ahead and do a couple of things. Like, let's switch my view from one view to 2 viewed horizontal on the camera. And I want to change this guy here from my front view to perhaps a custom view so that I can see something that I can go ahead and switch around until I see something that I like by moving my camera on that perspective. Let's go ahead and rotate this, orbit this a little bit on the custom view 1. So let's go ahead and choose that custom view. And I'm going to go ahead and I can manipulate the camera from this perspective, as you can see. So I can emphasize the 3D environment by doing so. Now, before I do that, let me switch back again this custom view 1 to to my front view. Let's switch it to that and zoom out a little bit. And what I want to do at this point is I want to bring in a light. So to bring in a light, you have 3 ways of doing this. Actually 5 ways of doing it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 ways of doing it. You could right click on the timeline, go new, light. You can select layer, drop down, new, light. Or you can use the shortcut Command Option Shift L on the Mac, or Control Alt Shift L on the PC. So creating a light gives you these settings. Now the settings change depending on the types of lights that you're working with. A parallel light is a light that will be shooting parallel to the position of the actual light. What does that mean? Think of a searchlight. Those searchlights that you see at car dealerships, or a flashlight, for example, that shoots a light that is like a beam of light. That's what a parallel light is. A spotlight is a light that basically increases depending on an angle of view. Think of it that way to compare it to the camera. So the angle by which you define the spot is what controls how much light or how little light there is within the shooting from the light. A point light, think of it as a light that shoots lights in all directions. A light bulb hanging from a wire, it's a point light. It shoots the same amount of light in all directions. An ambient light, it's a wash of light that is provided to the entire scene without any specific direction. So it's almost like an atmospheric light. It's like a gloom that lives exactly at the same amount of light and color around the entire scene. So this changes the entire color of the entire scene by giving it a wash of light. Let's call it that. So let's start with a spotlight. So with the spotlight, I see options that include what color I want my light to be. So I can change the color to a warm color. For example, in this case, I want to change it to a warm color, like a warm orange, burnt orange, something like this. Click OK. I can change the intensity of the light, so I can increase it or decrease it. I can change the angle of my cone, so how much spreading or how little spreading do I want the actual light to shoot. Feathering is basically how sharp or how blurry do I want the feathering of the light around the cone of light. Fallout refers to the style of feathering as the light dissipates from the actual cone, and you could, by default, is none, but you can choose smooth or inverse square clamped. Inverse square clamped, it's actually the one that mimics the most real world scenarios, and therefore it takes the longer to render. My advice and my workflow tells me start always with none and then change as necessary. But I seldom find myself changing that setting, to be honest with you. And then you can tell the light to either cast shadows or not cast shadows. For now, let's leave this without casting shadows. So let's go ahead and set this up. By the way, all of these settings can be keyframed and can be changed through time. Okay, so let's go ahead and call this spotlight spot. Let's call it spotlight 1. Let's just keep it as is. I'll click 1 and you'll notice that my light, my general lighting for the scene disappears. And now I see a spotlight that has been set up basically pointing to anything in my composition. If I move my camera around, let's call the position value for the camera, and let's start switching around the position of my camera. Let's actually do that by using my custom view here. And if I move my camera around, you'll notice here that my light affects my composition to focus that light in that area. Let me select the light so you see where the light is. The light happens to be here, and that is the cone that it creates. Let me switch my view on this custom view 1 so you actually can see this from the left, and you'll see where the light is, and that is that orange set of lines that indicates the actual light. Now, your spotlight has an actual focal point. It actually has a point of interest. So you can actually move the point of interest. And that, by the way, it's also under the settings for the camera here. So you can actually change the transformation points, the transformation properties. And you can change all of the properties of that light as if it was a regular layer. As you can see, you have position, orientation, and so on. So you can change those settings as well. You can go ahead and do it here as well, and all of them can be keyframeable, like I said before. You can actually move your light back in space, in the Z space, to increase the amount of coverage of the light, or get it closer to your subject to focus a little bit more if that's what your intent is. So if I want sort of a vignette look, that's a good position for this particular light. And I can go ahead and switch around in these views here to better fine-tune the position of the light. So I can zoom out and actually select the light and move things around from this angle if I want to. And like I said, as I do this, if I had set up an original keyframe, I would get a really nice set of keyframes to work with on my timeline, just like with any transformation. Now, if you notice under transform, not only can I transform, but I also have light options. Those light options match the options that you had when you double click the light, this light settings. So you have things such as intensity that can be, all of them can be keyframed, as I told you. You can change the color, you can change the angle, so you can make the angle narrower to focus more in one spot or spread it out a lot more depending on what your intent is. You can change the feathering of the cone. So let me reduce this so you can see bringing the feathering to 0 and what it does as I increase it. So you get this nice feathering effect around the actual edge of the cone. You can, like I said, change the fall off if you want to. You can change the radius of the light, okay, the fall off distance, and this all is based on the actual option that you choose here. So that's why it increases your values. These two, radius and fall off distance, change based on what you choose here. So you can reduce or increase those values, and it can calculate things for you based on what settings you have here to increase or decrease to actually make things lights look a lot more natural, and therefore it increases the rendering time. That's why I said try first with none. Try it with that option because it doesn't affect your rendering time as much. If you're not getting the results you want, then you can investigate these two other areas. You also have the option to set cast shadows on and off, and we'll do that in the next example. And you can change the amount of darkness of the shadow. So this is a spotlight. If I don't want to see that light anymore, I can turn off its visibility from the actual layers window. And let me create a new light with that light off. I don't want to have that light anymore. Let me go ahead and create a new light. And in this case, I'm going to, instead of spot, I'm going to use a point light with the same settings. You'll notice that all the other settings disappear because this doesn't have any cone or it doesn't have any feathering. It does have fall off, however, and it has the ability to cast shadows as well. But this will behave like a light bulb. So when I move that around, you'll notice that basically the light behaves like a light bulb. Whenever I move the light, it's basically the light is pointing in that specific area. So if I have the light, notice that the light right now is in front of this cloud over here. When I move it behind it, I don't see that cloud. I see it as dark because the light is behind it. So you actually have the ability to affect the color and brightness of objects, and also how much you see of them within the camera view based on the position of lights. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind. That is a point light. A point light is just like a light bulb hanging from a wire. Now, let me go ahead and create a new composition. And I'm going to create a small composition with the same settings that we've been working with. And in this composition, I am going to set up one solid. So I'm going to create a solid, new, from the flyout menu, right click on the timeline, new, solid. And I'm going to make that solid the size of my composition. So I actually want to make it a little bit bigger. And I'm going to make it white. And I want to make it twice the size of my composition. So to do that, I'm going to click on that number here. Make sure that I click on lock aspect ratio first. Click on that number, and then at the end of the number, I'm going to click again, and I'm going to use my asterisk key on the keyboard, and then I'm going to put the number 2. That means 1280 times 2. When I hit the enter key or return key on my keyboard, basically the solid settings have created that solid value to twice the size of my composition, which is what I want. So I want that to be basically my layer to start with. I'm going to turn it into a 3D layer, and I am going to bring it down to the bottom of the scene. Oops, sorry. Let me go ahead and rotate it first. So I'm going to rotate. I'm looking at this from the top and I got confused. So I apologize for that. I'm going to rotate it first. I'm going to rotate it on the x-axis. So if I want to rotate this on the x-axis, all I have to do is just simply either use my orientation values or rotation values. Let's go ahead and rotate it on the x-axis. And I'm going to rotate it to about 90 degrees. So 90 degrees would be what I want. And then let me switch my top view here to the left view. And I want to bring that down, that layer down to the bottom. So it's almost like a floor, so to speak. That's my floor. Then I'm going to bring in a layer in here. I'm going to bring in a graphic that I had imported. Let me see if I can find it here. If you don't find something by simply looking at things, you can always go ahead and do a search by clicking on this up here. And I believe this was called glass. And it looks like I have not imported it yet. So let me go ahead and import it really quick. Let's see, Lecture 7, stained glass, there it is. So I'll import that file. And this is just a JPEG, nothing fantastic. Let me bring it in. You'll notice that my JPEG is not 3D yet, so I'll turn it into a 3D layer. And I'm going to place that JPEG 3D glass thing right on top of my solid down here. So I'm going to just simply bring it in. Now I want to create a camera at this point to see what the interaction between these two things is really quick. So what does that mean? Well, before I create the camera, let me switch my left view to my custom view. So you'll notice now that when under the custom view, if I place, let me actually maximize this panel. So if I keep on pushing that glass further down, it starts crisscrossing with my floor. So they are actually acting like actual 3D layers in space, okay? They actually do behave like 3D layers in space. So beware that things can crisscross each other in 3D space when you're working in 3D space. They actually are behaving like 3D objects. So know that they can get caught off from, and if you rotate this, the visibility of this guy, if I go ahead and orbit my bird's eye view here, let me actually bring it out a little bit. You'll notice that when I select that layer, if I move it, it'll start popping up at the bottom somewhere. So they're basically intersecting with one another, and that is something to keep in mind. So I'm just simply going to put it as if it was laying on top of that floor, okay? And let me go ahead and switch this view. Actually, I'm going to keep this view as is. I'm just going to rotate its size ever so slightly like this. I'm going to create a camera to mimic basically this so that we can see this on the actual active camera. So I'm going to create a new camera. And I'm going to keep it as a 35 mil, nothing fantastic on that. I want to keep it as a 2-node camera in this case. And I want my node, my point of interest for that node, let me switch this view here to my left view. Now I want to bring that point of interest for the camera, which is this one, down to the bottom, right here where the camera and the floor meet. That's what I want to do. I also want to change the camera position over here. So I'm going to use my shortcut with the C key to move to orbit my camera and take advantage of my shortcuts by pressing the middle mouse button while pressing the Alt key. And maybe I can press the C key to get to the dollying option for the camera, press C again to orbit. So I can go ahead and start making use of all the different shortcuts to move things around and get into a position where I like what I'm seeing. So that's the setup right now. Now to this entire setup, what I want to do is I want to bring in light. So I'm going to go ahead and, sorry, not a camera, a light. So I'm going to bring in a light. And in this case, I want to use a spotlight and I want to make it white. I want to just make it full blast white. And then I'm gonna click OK. Now you'll notice that the camera is pointing at the light is pointing to that image. So you see that the light is actually illuminating my picture. Now let me go ahead and I need to see the settings on this light. First things first, I need to make sure that I am at 100%, which I am. Second, I want to make sure that I have cast shadows on. You notice that right now they're off, and therefore the light is passing through the image, as you can see. If I turn them on, you'll notice that I'm going to start casting a shadow over here on this thing as soon as I turn them on. But you notice that, okay, they're on, and the light's still going through. What happened? Well, when you turn on lights on a scene, now all of the objects that you have as 3D objects on the scene contain what we call a material option to them. And so let's go to the image. If I go to that image and I uncollapse it, you'll notice now that I have something called material options. And under material options, I need to tell each one of the layers whether it receives or how it reacts to the lights that I have been setting up on the scene. So if I uncollapse that, you'll notice that cast shadows for that particular layer is off. So when I say, please do cast shadows, boom. Now notice that the light is no longer going through onto the background. Okay, so that's what that does for you. You can also have cast shadows only if that's all you're looking for. So you can use objects to project shadows in order to enhance the scene if that's what you want, or you can have them off and have the light go through the objects. Normally, you want the objects to cast shadows if you're using lights. Let me go ahead and go back to the light settings and increase that light a little bit more so we can better see what we're doing here. So let me increase it to about 200% so that it's completely bright and we see no light going through it. Under the materials for the objects as well, we have the option for getting light transmission. Light transmission allows a certain amount of light to go through the object based on a percentage. By default, light transmission is at 0%. But if I increase that, I get the light to go through the object, almost creating kind of a stained glass effect, allowing me to see a projection of that image onto another object, in this case, the floor. So the floor is seeing the projection of the light through the stained glass image, making it almost look like it's an actual stained glass see-through light. And you can use this for effects to create lamps or to create projections of objects onto other objects in your compositions. So this all becomes activated when you start working with 3D layers and having lights in them. So you have the ability to determine whether the object is casting shadows or not, whether it is accepting shadows or not, whether it's accepting lights or not, and whether you want the object to have transmission. By default, any layer that you create into 3D or make 3D will have cast shadows off. So you need to turn them on before you start playing with these things. That's number one. Second, by default, it will have accept shadows on, which is weird. But it's on, they will be on, and so it will accept. In this case, what you're looking at is actually what would be considered a shadow, but because we have light transmission, the object itself, the actual image, is acting like a see-through image, and you can make a projection through a light. Okay, so you can actually create what we call a projector. Okay, you also, when you start working with more 3D environments, you can actually start changing the material of the object to change things such as specularity and metalness. Specularity refers to the highlights on an object. So if you want an object to have to look shiny or to look dull, you would change the specularity. And this refers more to materials in 3D environments. So if you have worked with a 3D environment, you know what specular means. Metal also refers to the actual quality of the material, to make things also dull or to look more plastic. So depending on how you want that particular layer to look, then you can affect those values in this program. They actually the program allows you to do a little bit of that material manipulation in the object. Now, if you truly want to have your object react to materials the way you intend them to be, then you need to look into working in the 3D program and creating those materials before you bring them into After Effects in order to get the best for your workflow, the best quality for your final compositions. So this is a short introduction to lights. And like I said, remember that the different types of lights depends on what you're trying to create. Parallel being like a flashlight or something that points in one direction. Spot, working with a cone of light. Point lights are the ones that basically shoot in all directions. And ambient lights, which are a wash of light for the entire composition.